that have classes in the other building, you're dismissed. And just before our teacher comes, we would like to, if you would please do it quietly. If you'd please do it quietly. Thank you. Remember where you are. Okay. Just before our teacher comes before us, we'll be singing a verse of hymn number 437. Where could I go? Living below in this so sinful world, hardly a comfort can afford. Striving alone to face temptation sore. Tell me, where could I go but to the Lord? Oh, where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul, needing a friend to save me in the end. Oh, tell me, where could I go but to the Lord? Oh, where could I go? Oh, where could I go? Seeking a refuge for my soul, needing a friend to save me in the end. Oh, tell me, where could I go but to the Lord? Amen.
Morning. This is a day the Lord has made. Yes. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Somebody asked me one time why I always start out that way. That's because I'm tired of hearing people say, let us rejoice and be glad in it. You go back and study it out, and that's a command from God. We will enjoy what he gave us. All right? We're coming to an interesting part of a saga when we get to Acts chapter 25, because we're coming to a situation to where everything is going to change as far as the thinking about Christianity. Now, granted, it still took a long time to get changed all the way, but here is where it starts, because a great man does something here. And if you go back and look, and I'll probably slip a little bit in chapter 26, because Wednesday is prayer night, and there's a couple things I think tie in that I don't want us to miss. But when you open up and look at chapter 25, you find that if you slide back in 24, Paul has been arrested. He has stood before Felix. Felix trembled because of the things that Paul said. Now, you would think if a guy's trembling that much about temperance and righteousness and judgment to come, that he would have changed his way of thinking, wouldn't you? So I'm not sure just how much trembling he actually was doing. Let's just suffice, Luke says he was trembling. But then he comes back and says a foolish thing. Anyone know what he said? I'll send for thee at a more convenient time. God doesn't want us to come to him at a convenient time. He wants us, especially those of us that claim to be his family, his children. He wants us at all times. And there's many cases in my life over the last 6 to 8 years to where being a Christian wasn't all that convenient from a worldly standpoint. I wonder where I'd be today if I only dealt with God when it was convenient to deal with him. I do know one thing. According to 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10, and Revelation chapter 20 and verse 12, I'm going to deal with God directly sometime, and he's not going to wait till my convenience. I better get used to dealing with Christianity now. But Felix was not the strongest governor you could have. He decided he's just going to keep Paul. And maybe Paul will give him some money or something. Remember another king looked at Jesus and really hoped that he'd see some performance from Jesus. Remember that? That he'd see some great feat, some deal of magic or something. Haven't you noticed God don't deal that way? And yet many people today still trying to base their Christianity on what they can see that God does for them. And many televangelists and media preachers really play on that. I get tired of seeing this guy named Peter Popoff. You ever see his commercials? He's going to send you that magic water. What I heard on the news today, maybe we need some magic water. They're saying now that most of the water in the United States, you shouldn't cook with, you shouldn't drink, and you shouldn't bathe in it. I bet Right Guard is really cheering that news, because we're going to need a lot of deodorant and antiperspirant. But let's go into chapter 25. Felix has been removed from governor for whatever reason. I'm not sure history even tells us what happened with old Felix. But a new governor comes and takes Felix's place. And what's his name? Festus. And I always get a little smile on my face when I think of Festus, because I grew up with a different kind of Festus on television. You may know who I'm talking about. But when you think about it, Festus is a very smart man. Felix had the idea, Paul, you've learned too much. And all your knowledge have made you what? You've gone insane, Paul. How could you believe all this? But Festus was of a different sort. And in verses 1 through 3, he meets these Jews. And what are the Jews wanting Festus to do? It is very important that you understand what happens in these 3 verses. They come to Festus and saying, you got Paul over there in Caesarea. We want you to bring him up here to Jerusalem so that we can try him. Now, I like that term, up to Jerusalem. Do you know why the Bible always talks about going up to Jerusalem and going down to other cities? Because the elevation of Jerusalem was higher than most cities of the realm. So when they talk about going up, they're not necessarily talking about going north. They're talking about going up. And they tell Festus, we want you to bring Paul here to Jerusalem so we can try him. But what was their real motive? They wanted to kill him on the way. You understand what's going on here. Sometimes people can get so belligerent, and I don't know of a better Greek term, so I'm going to say wacko, that they don't even think of anything but getting their way, even if it means killing the opposition off. But Festus isn't dumb. He knows what the Jews want to do. You don't think that went into the records with Felix and why he had to send all those soldiers and horsemen and Roman fighters to escort Paul to Caesarea? I mean, things like that in the Roman Empire weren't done secretly. You had to justify why you're moving Roman soldiers around, especially at that level. And so Festus knew what was going on. He knew the Jews wanted to kill this Paul, whoever he was. So in verses 4 and 5, he tells them what's going to happen. And I like the way this governor took charge. What did he tell them is going to happen? He says he's going to be tried in Caesarea. That's where I'm going to sit in judgment of him. And if you're so adamant that he's done wrong, You that are able men, you come down to Caesarea and make your charges to me there. Now, you know the first thing he did that was intelligent? Notice he says, you men that are able. Not everybody could just drop everything and go to Caesarea for a trial of this nature. They still had other things to take care of. And I think Festus knew that. So what he's doing is he's diminishing the numbers until he can get a grip on what's going on. And I find that very intelligent as a political move. But he says, that's where I'm going to try him. So you guys are just going to have to come to Caesarea, make your charges there, if you're able. He waits 10 days. And I don't know how long he actually waited. The Bible says over 10 days. And then in verses 6 and 7, these Jewish leaders get to Caesarea. And everything gets put in order. And Festus finally calls the trial, doesn't he? And these Jews get up there, and the Bible says they made many accusations against Paul. And I don't know how many different accusations they made. I know one of them, they made the same one they tried to do with Pilate and Jesus, and it worked with Pilate. Remember what they told Pilate? If you're a friend of his, you're no friend of who? And Pilate buckled, didn't he? He didn't want word getting out that he was siding against Caesar. We're going to find that Festus has a little more courage than that. Pilate just turned around and said, well, I'm going to wash my hands of this. Let me tell you something in a sidebar. I won't charge you any extra for this. You never can please God by washing your hands of doing what is right. The one thing God expects out of us is as much within our power to always, 100% of the time, do what we know is right. And remember Pilate? I find no fault in this man. I find this man is innocent. But tell you what, I'm just washing my hands of the deal anyway. Festus wasn't that way. What was the common denominator with all the accusations the Jews made against Paul? We're told straight out in verse 7 what the common denominator was. Anybody see that there? They couldn't prove none of them. Not one charge had any foundation to it. Not one charge could be verified. And even their own laws said you could only verify things at the testimony of how many? 2 or more witnesses. I don't know how many actually came to Caesarea. But I do know there was no proof of any of the charges. And I only know of one specific charge. They tried to make a case with Festus that he had violated Caesar's laws somehow. They're trying to pull the same thing the Jews did to get Christ crucified, aren't they? This time it didn't work so well. Because Paul stands up to Festus and answers all these charges. And look at what he says. He says, I have done nothing contrary to the law of the Jews. Now, what was Paul raised as? Was he not raised as a Pharisee? At the feet of who? Gamaliel, one of the most famous lawyers and law instructors of the Jewish history. And Paul sat directly at his feet. So you're talking about a man that knows the law of the Jews, aren't you? You look at some of his writings, and he was well versed in what the scriptures say. In the next chapter, he uses that with Agrippa, doesn't he? Doesn't he say, King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know thou believest. Paul knew what he's talking about. So when he said, I've done nothing against the law of the Jews, this is not just somebody trying to save his life. He's actually backing back around and saying, let's get specific. These people are accusing me of breaking the Jewish law. Show me where. Remember what Jesus said to his accusers? Which one of you convinces me of sin? In other words, Jesus is saying the same thing. Let's get specific. You think you got a charge with me? Lay it out there. You know what the Bible tells me? It tells me they had to pay people to bring accusations against Jesus. I imagine they were trying to do the same thing with Paul. But Paul is just pointing out to Festus. And he says, not only have I not done anything offensive to the law of the Jews, I've not done anything offensive to what else? The temple. Now, what's the temple got to do with it? Isn't that part of the law of the Jews? Why the separation? Probably because people get in bad habits. Real bad habits. What did they accuse Jesus of? Promising to destroy the temple. Remember that? Can any of you show me one verse where Jesus ever disrespected the temple? Just one. Could you show me one verse where he ever said that he was going to do any damage to the temple? No, the closest they could come to it is Jesus says, you see this? This temple is going to be destroyed, and I'm going to rebuild it. What's he talking about there? Is he talking about the physical temple there? He's talking about his body, isn't he? And what is that great confession? Remember what Jesus said? Blessed art thou, Simon, son of John, for flesh and blood did not reveal this unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto you, thou art a little stone, but on this large foundational rock I will build my church, and death itself will not prevent it. That's a direct English interpretation of what Jesus says there in Matthew 16. And did they put him to death? But was the church still built? Anybody in their right mind should know Jesus wasn't talking about the physical temple. The first time it took Solomon 7 years to build it. The second time it took years for Ezra and Nehemiah to get it built. Then when Herod built the one that was standing then, how long did that take? 46 years. And they really thought this carpenter was going to rebuild the temple in 3 days? That's doing some work. They had to know he wasn't talking about the physical temple. But apparently they've never changed their mind. It worked with Jesus. Let's see if it'll work with Paul. We convinced Pilate. Let's see if we can convince Festus. Now, a lot of my relatives don't like me saying things like this. But us Jews are a hard-headed bunch of people. Once us Jews get an idea, we will keep doing the same thing again. And they're trying the same thing with Festus that worked with Pilate. And Paul comes back and says, I've done nothing against the temple. Matter of fact, if you read the things Paul wrote, he glorified the temple as God intended it to be. After all, what did Jesus call that temple? The house of God. And then Paul says there's a third thing that I'm obviously innocent of. What was that? I've done nothing against Caesar. Nothing at all against Caesar. Who did Festus answer to? What'd you say, Daniel? Caesar. He didn't answer the Sanhedrin. Theoretically, he didn't answer to God. Except in the fact that they considered Caesar a god. You know, even Jesus referred to Caesar as a god. Paul is saying, I've done nothing against Caesar. But we all knew that. Because we've already been told by the good physician Luke that they couldn't prove any of their charges. Go ahead, Brother Forrest. I think there's the same three reasons all of us do things we know better than. You've got a fear of the consequences. Remember, it says many of the Jewish leaders believed in Jesus, but for fear of the people. That's why they came and arrested him at night. And the other one said they were afraid of being cast out of the temple. They're afraid of being shunned by the Jews, which was more than just a religion. One of the problems we have in 2022, they didn't have back then, was a religion of God's people wasn't just something you did on Sunday. And if the Cowboys were playing Sunday evening, you didn't come back for Sunday evening worship. After all, next week I can come eat another piece of cracker and drink a little more juice. And I'll be okay with God. I can skip Wednesday after Wednesday after Wednesday. But as long as I show up once in a while, I'm okay with God. That wasn't the way it was in the Jewish culture.
And also for the teacher, when you mentioned this, I think one of the fears of them losing their position of what they had, you know.
Oh yeah, we're going to get to that in just a second.
Yeah, you know, I was just going around in my mind, you know, especially when you mentioned it, you know, we got to always stand for the truth. You know,
That's right.
Even the, according to the law, the Jews had to do it also.
Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. I want to finish this thought before I forget it. You ever figure my brain's as old as my birth certificate, right? Under the Jewish culture, it was a way of life. Remember Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34? It said that people are going to have to teach people how to be part of the family before they can be adopted in. The Jews, you were born into the family. As soon as you were born, you were part of the Jewish culture. And everything about their finances, everything about their living arrangements, everything about their teaching, everything about the way they conducted themselves came back to Sinai. Now, they weren't always good at it, but that was the culture. How I wish Christianity, the Church of Christ, can become a culture to us. My wife can tell you, she's heard it many times from the pulpit, Christianity is not something I do. A Christian is what I am. Remember what David said there in Psalm? Thy word have I hidden in my heart. It was part of him. The book of Revelation calls it our reins. You know what reins on a horse do? They control the horse, don't they? And that's what God refers to ourselves as. He's got reins on us. We've got liberty, but it's a controlled liberty. There's things that the Lewis family doesn't do because it's not in the will of God. I don't need a worldly excuse. I remember when I was treasurer of Vietnam veterans in Mariposa, we had a board meeting and they were planning on having an activity, and I realized they were trying to schedule it for a Wednesday night. And finally, when I could get a word in, I said, gentlemen, you can't do it on a Wednesday night. Well, why not? Well, the bylaws of the Vietnam Veterans of America says the treasurer has to be at all such functions to raise money. And I won't be there. Well, Dave, why not? I go to Bible study on Wednesdays. You know what? One of them had the audacity to ask me. I don't think he ever asked me a question ever again. He said, well, can't you miss it just once? You know what I told him? Sure I can. I just don't want to. We had that function on a Thursday night, which I had no problem with. And the rest of the time I was treasurer of that group, we never planned anything on a Wednesday. That's because that's what I am. I don't love Brother Flowers because of anything he's done, and he's done some fabulous things. I love him because of what I am. And I can say that to all of you. I love Sister Dunn because of what I am. I love my wife because what she is first and what I am second. But the rest of you I love because of what I am. And now let's look at the prestige. There was some glory to being a member of the Sanhedrin, of being a Levite. Remember what Jesus says? These men, they take pride in being called rabbi, master, doctor. You know, I got alphabet soup I can put under my name. But Jesus says, don't do that. And yet we have preachers in the church like to be called doctors so-and-so. Do you know what the word doctor really means when you follow it all the way back? Educate. It means master. It means rabbi. Yeah, because we call it doctor, not master or rabbi, we've even got some well-known members of the church preaching in our pulpits that everything they send out is doctors so-and-so. I get people that are shocked, especially from the denomination. Well, you don't want to be called pastor. You don't want to be called reverend. You don't want to be called father. What do you want to be called? I say, Dave is fine. Well, I just can't bring myself to call a man of the cloth Dave. I said, well, then try Mr. Lewis. But don't call me those other things. And don't call me late for dinner. But that's your answer, Kenny. Some of it's prestige. They liked everyone looking up to them. And it wasn't just the ones rejecting Christ. We got two very interesting ones. Nicodemus, a member of Sanhedrin, came to Christ by night. He was afraid of what his fellow Sanhedrin members would think, wasn't he? And remember Joseph of Arimathea, what does it say about him? He was a disciple of Christ, but secretly. He didn't want to get kicked off the Sanhedrin either. There's just one in the scriptures that was probably a member of Sanhedrin that didn't care what they thought. Anyone know who that was? I'll give you a hint. He wrote 5 books in the New Testament. A man by the name of John. Why do you think when they're having the trial, it was so easy for him to just get in there? Remember it says the one knowing John just opened the door for him? Peter had to warm his hands at the devil's fire, and look what that cost him. But that's why they didn't want to give it up. And Jesus had that problem too, the same one you got, Kenny. Remember what he said to Nicodemus there in John 3? How can you be a teacher of the Jews and not know this? And I've wondered about it. I've wondered about Paul. As sharp as he was, why couldn't he figure all this out sooner? Because a lot of times religiously, and you know I love Brother Walker. I love him more than any other preacher I think I've ever sat at the feet of. But I will tell you this honestly. I never take anything he says just because he said it. If it doesn't sound right to me, I go home and try to figure out where I'm wrong. Then if I can't figure out where I'm wrong, I might call Jeff on the phone and say, I've got a little confusion here. A lot of times I find out just like JD said to me one time when we were driving home, you can have a lot of conversation with a little boy in a car seat on the way traveling 35 miles home. You know what he said to me one night? He says, Grandpa, I think you and Brother Walker are saying the same thing, but you're saying it differently. Sometimes that's what it comes out to. He says, why is that? I said, that's easy. I was born in Chicago and raised in Southern California, and he's from Rochester, New York. There's going to be different ways of saying things. I get a lot of kind of. I had someone from, one from Kenya and one from India call me this week on the phone. And I agreed with what they were saying, but I had to stop and think and analyze what it was they were saying because those people don't talk the way I do. One of them, I think, learned his English from that guy on Star Wars. That was the name Yoda. He had the words all mixed up and backwards, and I had to really pay attention to what he was saying. And when I realized that I agree with him, now I can answer his question. But that's why, Kenny, those 3 reasons. And there may have been others. I ran into members of the Church of Christ that are only here because their grandfather was. And no offense, Daniel, I loved your great-grandfather or grandfather, whatever he was, very dearly. But if Warren Hogan's the only reason you're here, you're wasting your time. Paul is letting Festus know, I've done nothing against the law of the Jews. I've done nothing against the temple. And I surely have done nothing against Caesar. But now Festus makes an offer in verse 9, which on the face of it, until you really pay attention to what's going on, might be a little confusing and a little bit contradictory. Festus responds to Paul by suggesting what? Why don't you come on with me up to Jerusalem and we'll sit in judgment there and you can face them face to face. What's the difference between verses 4 and 5 and verse 9? Why was it too dangerous to bring Paul from Caesarea to Jerusalem earlier, and now it's safe to bring him? Anyone know? There's a very academic reason for it. Now, the reason Festus didn't want to send for Paul and have him brought to Jerusalem is because what were the Jews going to do? They were going to attack and kill him on the way. Nobody in their right mind then would have physically attacked a Roman governor's entourage. Because what would happen if they did? Jerusalem might cease to exist if Caesar was such a mind to. And don't think I'm wrong. Pilate had 23,000 Jews killed in one night. And you know why? They woke him up. Remember the Jews told Jesus, how can you talk about us being free? We've never been in bondage. Man, they didn't know their own history. They were in bondage over and over and over and over again, weren't they? And when they said that to Jesus, were they not in bondage to Rome? And Caesar had the right, I'm not saying the moral right, but the physical and legal right to do with him whatever he chose to do. You think a bunch of Jews, most of them cowardly to start with, is going to get together and attack the governor's entourage? Not likely. Because even if they did kill Paul and take him away from Festus, even if they killed Festus, you think Caesar's going to sit back and says, oh, well, it's been a hard day, let's move on? Not if you understood these Caesars. Not if you've ever looked at the Roman history. So Festus is telling Paul, okay, I can see what's going on. I'll tell you in a minute how I know that's what he's thinking. Let's go down up to Jerusalem and solve this once and for all. Did Paul say, okay, that sounds like a good idea? He says, no. I get the feeling Paul had enough of this. He tells Festus, I'm going to put it in my order so that you can see where I'm coming from. He says, you know I have done nothing wrong. You know this, Festus. These people weren't able to prove anything against me. I'm a Roman citizen. I've been brought before a Roman magistrate. I stand and the judgment is Caesar. And then he says, if I have done anything worthy of death, I would refuse not to die. You ever hear anyone argue whether or not capital punishment is moral or not? Apparently, Paul believed it was. And you know why he believed it was? Go back and study the Jewish law back at Mount Sinai, all forward. See if you can find the 27 crimes that the law of God condemned death as the punishment. There are 27 things under the law of Moses that if you committed, you were to be put to death for. And I used to like to tell my kids, one of them is disobedient to parents. Of course, you're talking about grown-up parents. Children over 30, that's who can be put to death for disrespecting their parents. Not a little kid like J.D., although I kind of like to have him the fear of God in him. Teaching a Bible class one time, a young teenage Bible class. And one little girl's father normally taught the class, but for some reason he was late, so I was teaching, and he came in just sat in the back. And the little girl raised her hand and said, Brother Lewis, you talk about the sovereignty of God. What does sovereignty mean? And I thought for a second how I'm going to explain this to the little child. And so let me tell you this, sweetheart. The next time your dad tells you to do something, look at him and says, no way, Jose, get out of my life. I can't do that, brother. Look, why not? Because he'd kill me. That's sovereignty. I think she got the message. I know everyone else did. Her father was sitting in the back grinning. He definitely understood what I was saying. Paul is saying, if I'd done anything worthy of death, I would refuse not to die. And we've had some people in life, in our own history in the United States, that once they were convicted, they admitted they were guilty, and when someone tried to commune their death sentence, they refused the pardon. When the last one was a pardon from Richard Nixon to somebody, he says, no, I did the crime. My religious belief said because I shed blood, I need to have mine shed. And he says, not only do I not want the electric chair at the gas station, I want the firing squad. And he became, in the state of Utah, the last person executed by the government in the United States by firing squad. But his lawyer was holding his hand a pardon from Richard Nixon. Paul was the same way. He said, if I'm guilty and I deserve to die, then I'm willing to die. But he says, I stand before the judgment seat of Caesar now. And he looks at Festus and essentially says, you have no right to turn me over to the Jews to be put to death for something you know I'm innocent of. That's a pretty powerful statement, isn't it? And he says, I stand in the judgment seat of Caesar. And then he did something that tied Festus's hands. What did he do? I appeal to Caesar. Checkmate. There was nothing that Festus could do at this point. Okay, you've appealed to Caesar. To Caesar you're going to go. But Festus has a problem. Anybody know what Festus's problem is at this point? You can't really send him to Caesar without a list of charges. First of all, he did no crime against Rome. Second of all, even the trumped up charges the Jews tried to bring against him were invalid. Festus hung on to that tiger's tail a little too long. I remember an old animated movie called Jungle Book. Anyone ever see that? There towards the end, you got this bear hanging on to the tiger's tail. And they're going around in circles. These buzzards up in the tree says, well, let go, let go. And the bear looks up there and says, I can't let go. There's teeth on the other end. That's what Festus had. Now he's got a tiger by the tail. He's got to send him to Caesar. But he might have had a way out that he wasn't thinking of, and I'm not sure it would have worked. But now you have another king come on scene. A man by the name of Agrippa. And I don't want you to forget Agrippa, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Him and his wife Bernice come to visit Festus for whatever reason. And I can just imagine the dinner conversation. You know, King Agrippa, I've got a problem with one of your citizens. He's appealed to Rome. And we're supposed to have judgment where he faces his accusers face to face. Literally he's saying, I can't get them to Rome because I don't even know what charges to bring. When the Jews came, Agrippa, you see how he's playing on Agrippa's religious beliefs? All they had was accusations about the superstition of the Jews. Now, I don't know what he means by superstition. The word literally means religious. Remember when Paul went to Athens, he said, I find that you are very religious because I find an altar to all these gods. So maybe he's telling Agrippa all they're complaining about is teachings of the religion of the Jews, which Festus wasn't an expert to speak on anyway. But then he says something that I think brings it right down to the nub. What else did he say that they were fussing about? This Jesus of Nazareth. Why were they fussing about him? They say he's dead. Paul claims he's alive. Which one's right? Well, now he's thrown a ball to Agrippa. Agrippa's a Jew. He says, I want to hear this man. I don't know what all his reasoning was. But Festus goes on even after that trying to explain why this man's innocent. Do you realize he's arguing for Paul against a Jewish king? That I find an interesting situation in the Scriptures. That's why I find the Bible so fascinating to read carefully. He says, I got no charges against him. But let me tell you something about Jesus being dead and then alive. The Jews made one big mistake in their thinking. I can just see on that Thursday evening when that spear went into the side of Jesus and the blood and water flowed forth, the Jews having a big celebration party. We won! He's dead. He's out of our hair. When Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea took his body on Thursday evening and buried it in the tomb, he's gone. We don't have to worry about him no more. You know what they forgot about? not only was Sunday coming, but they had fulfilled prophecy. What was the last prophecy concerning the crucifixion of Christ? I'm not talking about his burial and stuff. What was the last prophecy? It's in the book of Zechariah. They looked on me of whom they pierced. That sword in his side, or that spear in his side, was prophesied by God, so that not a bone of his would be broken. They forgot that they'd fulfilled prophecy. And boy, you start digging into it, you've got all kinds of prophecy. You got one of his own disciples would betray him. You've got a prophecy how much he'd betray him for. You've got a prophecy he'd be on someone else's cross. You've got a prophecy that he'd be hung between two thieves. You got a prophecy that he'd be taken down and buried in someone else's tomb that's never been used. The list is just fantastic. That he's going to be whipped, that he's going to thirst, that they're going to gamble at the foot of the cross, that while he's hanging there, they're still going to be ridiculing him. All these things the Jews seem to have set aside, that every step of the way, up to and including, you're going to bring him among the Gentiles to sentence him to death. Remember they told Pilate, and this is a very important thing if you want to understand Scripture. They said, we are Jews, we cannot put him to death. Was that true? No. They put John the Baptist to death. Herod put all those baby boys to death. They put Stephen to death. Was it illegal for the Jews to kill anybody? What was it that they could not do? And if you understand this, you're going to understand another prophecy. They could not put him to death on the cross. They could not hang him on a tree. Only Rome could do that. And I believe I can show you 3 or 4 passages of Scripture that prophesied that Jesus Christ would be nailed to a cross, that he'd be hung on a tree. That's what they're saying, we can't do it. Why do you think they didn't already put him to death? Why do you think every time they tried to stone him, which would have put him to death, by the way, that he'd disappear on them? Because God had prophesied he would die by hanging on the cross. And now they forgot something else. Their own prophets prophesied. And Peter quoted them in Acts chapter 2. His soul wasn't going to be left in Hades to corrupt. What's he saying? He's going to live again. That was prophesied by God in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3. It was prophesied by David. It was prophesied by Job. It was prophesied again by David in the Psalms. Over and over again. Jeremiah, Isaiah. All prophesied he was coming back. And Jonah, by Jesus' own words, prophesied that he'd only be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. That's why I'm so adamant we've got to get away from this Good Friday stuff. If Jesus was killed and buried on Friday, it means nothing. And I'll tell you why. Because you don't have 3 nights if he was buried on Friday. And guess what? Since the Gospel of Mark tells us he's buried after sundown, you don't have 3 days if he's buried on Friday. But Jesus said he's going to be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. The only way you can get that is Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. And Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And by the way, since it says he was buried after sundown, Now you're telling me that 2 members of the Sanhedrin are messing with a dead body on the Sabbath, the Passover to boot? Not likely to happen. Why do you think the ladies had to come back on Sunday to finish the process? Because what happened after sundown Friday night? Now you're into the Sabbath, because the Jewish Sabbath started at sundown, just like any other day. That's why the words in Genesis 1 are so important. Remember everything that God did? And it was the evening and the morning the first day. The evening and the morning the second day. Which comes first? But my main thing is do the math. If he's buried on Friday, you don't get 3 nights. If Mark is correct and he's buried after sundown, you don't get 3 days. And the Jews had forgotten or set aside the idea that he's coming back. Arnold Schwarzenegger was not the first one to say, I'll be back. Jesus Christ said it way back in the Garden of Eden. This is the stuff the Jews forgot or set aside. And I'll warn you, there are things that we don't forget that God said. We just set them aside sometimes for a little bit. Let me give you a fair warning and we'll close. That is a dangerous way to live your life. A very dangerous way. I've often said how many people are going to miss services because the Cowboys have first and goal on the 1-yard line. If they get a touchdown, they win the Super Bowl. And just as that ball is hiked, the clouds roll back and here comes Jesus. Or maybe they'll have a heart attack and die. Those poor people are going to go through eternity not knowing who won that Super Bowl. Isn't that a pathetic thing to think about? Jesus said, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? What is your soul worth? That is a lesson from the Jews. And when Paul was speaking before Agrippa, he started out talking about his conversion. And I'm going to cover this real quickly because I want you to understand something. Agrippa responded. What did he say? Almost what? I want you to get the whole verse in. Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. I'll tell you why I want you to get that in there, Daniel. We bounce that word around all kinds of ways today, don't we? A Christian church, a Christian Bible, a Christian preacher. Do you know that was so precious to God, it's only used 3 times in the Scriptures? First in Acts 11, when it says they were first called Christians at Antioch. Correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but isn't that verse 26? Then you got Agrippa here in Acts 26 saying, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. And then you've got Peter telling us if a man suffers as a Christian, I believe that's in 1 Peter 4, he glorifies God. We get no glory by suffering as an evildoer. We just get our just deserts. Hold on to that word Christian. And if you're here today and you're almost persuaded, let me give you some good advice. Get over it. Felix had a more convenient season, and history shows he never accepted Christianity. There's no record of Agrippa ever obeying the gospel of Christ. Be careful when you put it off. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you once again for allowing us to come together and open up a part of your word. And prayerfully, Lord, hoping that we've learned something that would help us live closer to you tomorrow than we did yesterday. And Father, I pray as always that I was able to step aside so that only your light, your word, and your love could shine through. In thy Son's most holy and precious name we pray. Amen.